Hi folks, it is Thibaut Van Dam here with another YouTube video, and for those of you who are not familiar with my channel, I am a DIY singer-songwriter and guitar tutor based in Southeast London, and today I'm very excited to be continuing my series about practical guitar and music theory. Specifically today we're going to be learning the minor scale, we're going to be learning how to play it, but also we're going to be learning a lot about it, so this might be different from other videos about the minor scale, and this is important if you want to know how to write songs in a minor key, if you want to understand how other people have written songs in a minor key. And also, I would just say that the next video I'm going to be making in this series is about functional harmony. And the reason I had to make this video first is because there's actually a unique relationship between major and minor. It's a very Zen sort of concept. And this idea is really important. There's this unique relationship that I'll be talking about later. And of course, understanding functional harmony is a really great starting point if you want to start writing your own music. At least if you have nowhere else to start and you've got you want to find the theoretical approach that we can follow. So if this sounds interesting to you, please stay tuned. Please consider liking the video. Please consider subscribing to the channel. It's the best way to stay in the loop. And of course, it motivates me to keep making content like this. So this video can tend to be a bit long. So I'm going to see where I can cut corners with repeating myself and stuff. I'll just go ahead and start by talking about some prerequisites. There are things you need to know in order to understand this topic. So you need to know the chromatic scale, you need to know what intervals are, also what sharp and flat is, and also the idea of triads, guitar anatomy. A lot of these things I've already talked about in previous videos leading up to this, and there will be some links in the description in the corner if you haven't seen those videos yet. I will say though that there are two key videos that are going to be the most helpful for understanding the rest of this video, which include the video I made about the major scale. A lot of what I talk about in the major scale is included in this video as well. And also the video I made most recently, which is the video about the harmonized major scale. This video is important because I will be referring to it later when I talk about the relationship between major and minor. And it's quite a dense, sticky topic to get into. There's a lot of detail. So if you haven't seen that, I recommend those two videos specifically. Okay, cool. So there will be timestamps below to each of the topics that I'll be discussing. So I'm not actually going to talk about the topics I'll discuss, even though I'd like to, just to save some time. But the first topic I'll be looking at is the theoretical minor scale and how it relates to the theoretical major scale. So as we discovered in that video about the major scale, there is only one major scale, and it follows a sequence of whole steps and half steps. And let's just go ahead and start by writing down what that is, especially because we'll be needing it later. I will also say that it will help if you have a notebook and two different colored pens. I should have said that before, but I didn't. The major scale. What is the major scale? I'm going to use red for the major scale. The major scale formula, we have a root note. Again, because of the chromatic scale and equal temperament, the root can be any note. And it's just about the space and the amount of steps from that note. That's an important idea to try to take on board. And I'll probably make a separate video about that just because it's so important. So the major scale includes the following steps. We have a whole step up from the root. Then we have another whole step. Then we have a half step. Then a whole step, a whole step, a whole step. And then finally a half step brings us back to the note we started on, which could be thought of as our root. So that is our major scale. And if you saw the video about the major scale that I made, then you know this formula. And the idea is basically you can start this note anywhere. This can be A, it can be A sharp, it can be B, whatever. But as long as you follow these amounts of steps, you will end up on that note you started on, and that sequence of notes will sound major for what it's worth. Some people call that happy or whatever, but this is what it will ultimately sound like. And that idea of equal temperament is super important to take on board. The minor scale operates in a very similar way, and perhaps more than might appear at first. But it is a series of whole steps. It is a series of half steps. This formula that we use, again, we can use it from any note in the chromatic scale. And when we follow this series of whole steps and half steps, you end up with something that sounds inherently minor. So let's leave some space between the last thing we wrote, and we'll write down minor scale. I'm going to use blue for the minor scale. And we have a root note, again, any note in the chromatic scale. But from that note, we would go up a whole step, a half step, a whole step, a whole step, then a half step, a whole step, and then finally one last whole step takes us back to the note that we started on. So these are our two scales. Now, it's worth pointing out, I might not have said it before, but I mean, I have to assume that you know what a whole step and a half step are. A whole step is the space of 2 frets on the guitar, and a half step is half that space, which is 1 fret. I mean, it's kind of intuitive, but if I didn't say it, I wouldn't feel good about making this video. So this is the formula, the minor scale formula. And it is different from the major scale formula. They basically, the order of those notes, specifically where they begin, where they go to next, and each subsequent step, they're different, basically. Okay, so that is the minor scale in theory. And if you take that theoretical minor scale or that theoretical major scale and you start from any instrument and you know the chromatic scale on that instrument, you will result in a major and minor scale, depending on which one you choose. How then do we play that on the guitar? So let's start with the open E string, and we'll just start by learning how to play the E minor scale using the minor scale formula. So E is our root, we go up a whole step. So that's the note F sharp. You can take note if you want, but you don't necessarily need to. We go up that whole step, then a half step, so the note G, then a whole step, A, whole step, B, half step, C, then a whole step, D, and then finally a whole step brings us back to the note E, which is the note that we started on, E to E. And usually on most guitars, the 12th fret is marked by the point at which the body meets the fretboard. So you can always sort of tell visually there, but you might also have a little sort of dot to tell you where you are. Okay, and that is our minor scale. Now, learning the minor scale in this way, practically speaking, is useful because it means that you'll start to learn different spots on the fretboard that you can play to get different results. And that is desirable of guitars. It's one of the reasons people are drawn to guitar to begin with, the fact that it's so dynamic. You can play the beginning of a minor scale on lower notes and then continue it on higher notes. See? That kind of general idea is the value of the guitar in this sense. So there is an advantage to that. Now, the disadvantage of learning how to play that minor scale on just one string is that it takes more time. And also, I will just point out that majorness and minorness are usually most observable when played sort of quickly, or where the notes are played closer together. It's also just worth pointing out that the idea of majorness and minorness are the thing we usually notice most about music, actually, in a general sense. So when we hear music, we tend to identify it as being major or minor sooner than we identify the note from which that major or minor scale derives. So you might hear something like that and say, oh, it sounded major, but you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell usually that we started on E and therefore it was E major. This is kind of the result of equal temperament, that each note is created equally in that sense. So unless you have perfect pitch, it's hard to identify the note or the note specifically that you're hearing, but the relationship between those notes, usually we can clock onto pretty quick. So now we've learned how to play that minor scale on one string, and it has its pros and cons, and I did a little digression there. Now let's talk about how to play that minor scale but on the lower 3 strings. This way we can stay in one area on the fretboard, and this is going to make it a lot easier to hear the difference between major and minor, because if we have to play that minor scale on just one string, we're stretching out the notes. So how do we do that? To do that, we're going to implement something called the 5-0 practical string rule. The 5-0 practical string rule is something I talked about in my video about standard tuning, basically because it's the kind of rule you can use to identify unison. Unison is the intervallic space that we attribute to the space of no fret movement if you play essentially the exact same pitched note. So these notes not only should sound the same, they should sound interchangeably so. And so the way the rule works, and the way that all the practical string rules work, is that when you play the 5th fret on a string and the open string just beneath it, it produces an interval. In this case, it is unison. And so we can use that to our advantage. Whereas before we saw the 5th, 7th, and 8th frets as part of the E minor scale, we can actually adjust all of those notes relatively according to the 5-0 rule. So if 5 is the same as the open A string, then we can do 0, 2, 3, because if we added 5 to each of those frets, we would end up with 5, 7, 8 on the E string, not the A string. So they sound the same. So we can use this kind of practical string rule to move those notes down. And so just to build off of that, we started with the open E string, followed by the 2nd fret, 3rd fret. Now we can do the open A string, then followed by the 2nd fret, and then the 3rd fret. So that's actually handy because it's the same pattern on each string. And then to complete this, the 10th fret and the 12th fret on the E string are the last 2 notes of the E minor scale. Now those notes are D and D. So we can actually play the open D string, which is that 3rd string down here, D, and then the 2nd fret, which is the same distance. It's the same as playing D to E, D to E. And they sound the same, don't they? So they're interchangeable in that way. So now we have this practical way of playing the E minor scale, and we could call it the E minor shaped minor scale. Down here on these lower 3 strings, E, A, D, starting from E, we have 0, 2, 3, then the next string, 0, 2, 3, then the next string, 0, 2. And I would recommend people that are watching this to practice the scale in that way. And then to practice it going up, and then going back down. Okay, great. So now that we've learned how to play this in one position on the fretboard, this is going to be making it a lot easier to hear the minorness in that scale. So this is going to be good to check your work. I think it's one of the things I love about playing guitar or playing any kind of music is that I create sound and I'm an audience of that sound as I create it, so I can sort of monitor myself. And that way I can hear, did that sound minor? Did that sound major? What does it sound like actually? And then I can adjust accordingly. Okay. So now I want to introduce this idea of the cage system. In my major scale video, I called this copy and paste, but it basically is this idea of universality, the cage system, and equal temperament, basically. So some amazing theoretical and design ideas all came together with the guitar. I did it twice, didn't I? I did boop. Anyway, came together with the design of the guitar. So in theory, equal temperament suggests that if you move things proportionately, you can basically play the same character of those things. So that means that the idea of the major scale or the major triad is just one major triad, and if you apply it to any note, you end up playing something that sounds major. This is a beautiful concept. When it came to the guitar, though, it got even more beautiful because they apply this design concept of the nut. Now, the nut is a flat, straight bar, and it looks really kind of just boring, basically. It's unassuming, but actually the design of this basically means that we can imitate it elsewhere on the neck, which basically results in being able to implement that theoretical idea of equal temperament with the practical idea of the guitar, which means we can adjust the pitch of all the strings equally in lots of ways. So the first obvious way is to use a capo. This is designed literally to adjust the pitch of all the strings equally. And I'll just put it on really quick. It might not sound good, but, and if we moved it up, it would adjust, again, all the strings equally. That's the idea. All the strings are moving relatively together. The next way we can do this is with a physical bar by using our index finger to produce a bar. I did a video about bar chords if you haven't seen it. And this same idea is applied. But then the third way is actually to do it in principle, to be thinking, if I were to adjust all of the strings equally, how can I then move the scale or then move the chord? So how do we do that? So for instance, if we want to take this E-shaped minor scale, we know the nut is here, so what we're going to do is move the theoretical nut to another fret. So in this case, let's move it to the 3rd fret. So before we were doing 0, 2, 3, but now that we've moved the theoretical nut, the new 0 to 3, now we play 0, 2, 3 according to this 3rd fret. So 3, 5, 6, next string, 3, 5, 6, next string, 3, 5. This is moving the scale, practically speaking. We are still playing a minor scale, but we are adjusting where we are starting, where the new 0 is, thereby making everything move relatively speaking. So now we know how to play any minor scale. It's not just E minor. We can play F minor or G minor, and they all sound minor. They all have that minorness to them. So that's what we're trying to capitalize on. You can now play any minor scale using this idea in mind. Next, we also can actually apply this minor scale formula, the E-shaped minor scale, starting from the A string actually. Because of the way that the strings are spaced apart, we can start it from A. So from A, 0, 2, 3, then D, 0, 2, 3, then G, 0, 2. Same physical pattern, and we actually do result in the same minor scale formula too. Very exciting. Okay, nice. Now I want to go ahead and talk about this idea of majorness and minorness. So this is a theoretical thing, so I'm going to put the guitar down now, and we're going to go ahead and talk about it. So just for the sake of it, let's just write down what the C major scale is. And because this is an exercise and something theoretical and practical by the end of it, just trust me that I know what I'm doing. So our root note for C major is C, and then the C major scale, following that major scale formula from C, would include the following notes: D, E, F, G, A, B, and finally C again. So using our knowledge of the chromatic scale and this formula, we would result in these notes if we started from C. And if that doesn't make sense, then you should see that video about the major scale. So let's go ahead now and solve for the A minor scale. So we're going to use the note A, but we're going to follow these this pattern of whole steps and half steps to solve for that. So our root note is O, and we'll use that other color ink, A, and then we go up a whole step. B, then a half step, C, whole step, D, whole step, E, half step, F, whole step, G, finally a whole step brings us back to A. Okay, so this is just kind of weird, right? The A minor scale looks an awfully lot like the C major scale. And in fact, these are inherently linked scales. They are called relative and major and minor scales. And the implications of this discovery are huge. There are a lot of different implications. The first and obvious is that A minor and C major are theoretically, musically, mathematically interchangeable, that you can play an A minor scale and you might find that you're actually playing the C major scale. Now, it's worth pointing out this major-minor relationship has to do with specific major scales and specific minor scales that are correlated. That C major is distinctly correlated to A minor. It's not just any old minor scale. This is why I chose A minor specifically. So to show you this, I'll just start by playing the A minor scale, the one we just learned, starting from 0, 2, 3 on the A string. A minor scale, and let's complete it to include the following B string and the C note. C major, A minor too. To A, A minor, C major. To A minor again. So the idea here is that these scales are very closely linked because they share all the same notes, just starting from a different position. As an aside, the fact that this starts in a different position of the C major scale is something called a mode. This is a topic that we'll talk about at a later date, but this is the power of actually starting a scale in a different point. And actually, this is sort of what I was talking about earlier, because what we just discovered is that the A minor scale is the C major scale. It just starts from a different position. So if you look at the C major scale, if you were to write the C major scale starting from the note A, and we'll do that, we would have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and A again. And if I put parentheses around that, you'll notice that this A minor scale is the C major scale. And if we did that with the A minor scale, it would continue to C. C major is A minor is C major. This is nuts. This is Zen. This is yin and yang right here. So the first implication is the interchangeability of the scales. The next implication is actually the harmonizing of these scales. So we know that the harmonized major scale uses stacked diatonic thirds. And we learned that there's actually a formula to the harmonized major scale, the harmonized major scale. Because the process of stacking diatonic thirds does not change, we end up with a pattern that the first chord is always major, the second chord is minor, the third is major, the fourth is major, the fifth is, fifth is major, the sixth is minor. Sorry, I think I got sort of lost there. The seventh is diminished, and that continues. So from C, we again have C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor. This is the harmonized C major scale. And as you can see, we've already learned the chords that would be in A minor. They're the exact same because they are stacked using the same process. So actually, the chords that are in A minor are the same as those in C major, only starting from a different point. So we end up with this exact formula, same formula, A minor, B diminished, C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor. This is the A minor key signature. This is the C major key signature as well. So those implications, that's really exciting. So then this begs the question, what is the difference between the major and minor key signatures? It is emphasis. It is where we put our attention to, where do we focus? I will talk about that more in my video about functional harmony. Now there's a third implication here, which is actually that certain distinct chords are also closely linked. If we do go through the tediousness of stacking diatonic thirds from the note C, we stack C, E, G, and B. So C major is comprised of these chords, C, E, G, and B. Technically C major 7th. I'll talk about that in a separate video too. Now let's stack diatonic thirds from A. A minor equals, technically A minor 7, equals A, C, E, and G. Okay, what have we just discovered? We've just discovered, that technically A minor includes the chord C major, and that if we were to do a diatonic third before C major, we would actually be playing A, C, E, G, and B. It would be a lot of notes, but we'd actually be playing A minor and C major. So what we learn is that actually the chords are inherently linked as well. This is a huge deal, and this is a big part of functional harmony. So I think I've covered everything I need to say. I know my camera's about to die, so I'm just going to say thank you for watching. If this was informative and helpful, please consider liking the video and subscribing. You should now know all about the minor scale. If you still have questions, write something in the comments below or reach out for a free first lesson. And I'll see you at the next one where we talk about functional harmony. Ciao for now.